Hello everyone and welcome back to a Kiwi 40k discussion video, whatever. So a long time ago, I created my own homebrew Space Marine chapter, the Storm Knights. Back in 2004 I think was when I originally created them. And over the years I've developed and established on them. And many of you may know, in Chapter Master, I actually got round to playing them and fleshing out a bit of the lore. And sort of explaining it to everyone. However, that's scattered over quite a few places, and it's a little bit concise, and I have retconned some of my old lore and things over the years, so I thought I would just put together, for the benefit mainly of myself, but for any weird people who are interested, the history and homebrew lore of my own personal Space Marine chapter, the Storm Knights. Alright, so we shall begin. The Storm Knights' origin started during the War of the Beast. They started with a veteran sergeant of the Dark Angels 4th Company named Varakal. He led 50 Marines in the defense of a hive city against the Orc forces upon the world. Now, this is the War of the Beast Orcs, so they were savage, they were smart, and they were hard-hitting. And the Dark Angels, in conjunction with the PDF defending the hive, were forced back and back and back, time and time again. Their chaplain, who was the one, or interrogator chaplain, who was the one leading them, was killed early on during the siege, so it was Sergeant Varakal who actually led the defense, organizing and coordinating the attack. They lasted for, 2 months they fought off against the Orcs until they were liberated and relieved by the Imperium, and when that happened, only 11, including Varakal, survived. However, the Orcs were routed off the planet, and the hive city, while decimated, was saved, including the people within it. As a reward and a testimony to his skills, his leadership and his capability, the chapter master of the Dark Angels awarded him the honour of his own chapter before founding. So remember, Thane organised that their forefounding would take place after the War of the Beast, and one of the Dark Angels' successor chapter contributions was this brand new chapter led by the Sergeant. So this was his reward. He managed to get 60 Marines and a number of Gene Seed, plus a couple of ships, as the basis for his new chapter while he rebuilt and established himself. Initially, Varakal was honoured and humbled by this, and he took to it with great gusto. I mean, he was a veteran sergeant, and he passed up being a captain, and he passed up being chapter master of his own chapter, and now he's suddenly become chapter master of his own chapter. He was very eager and desperate to prove himself, so he threw himself into liberating worlds from the Orcs at the beginning. However, things took a little bit of a dark turn for him when the Dark Angels explained to the veteran sergeant, who was not inducted into the inner circle at the time of his ascension, the truth about the Dark Angels, their hidden little secret. Now this incredibly infuriated and pissed off Varakal, not against the Fallen. I mean, yes, he hated them and wanted them to all die, but the fact that this was now his burden, this was now his new chapter's burden, and the fact that the Dark Angels were forcing this hunt for the Fallen, the secrecy, these potentially traitorous actions upon their successors as well, damning every one of the Dark Angels' bloodline to the same fate for the sins of the past. As I said, he felt that it should just be the Dark Angels in the second founding chapter's problems, not theirs. However, reluctantly and unfortunately, he was forced into taking part in the hunt of the Fallen and organising his chapter around the operating practices of the Dark Angels. This turned his enthusiasm for glory and gusto into a cold rage, and now he threw his new chapter into fighting Orcs to make himself feel better and to ignore all the stuff he'd just learned. It did actually quite well for them. They slaughtered any Orcs they came across, mostly crusading on the southwest fringes of the Imperium, so kinda border edge of the realm of Ultramar, but more into the is it Segmentum Tempest? The bottom, you know what I mean, the bottom left hand side sector. So they threw themselves into that fight, recruiting people from worlds they saved. Basically, there was kind of a mongrel chapter. There was no real organization. They just recruited people as they went and planted them as best they could across their, their sort of floating flotilla of a chapter, until they reached the world of Telenor. Telenor is in the Segmentum Tempestus, and it is in the Ullus sector. So that's the same sector where Krieg is, except it's a little closer towards the Segmentum Solar than Krieg is. So it's not too far away from the border between the Ullus sector and, well, the Segmentum Tempestus and Segmentum Solar. So they came across this world, and it was being besieged by orcs. After the War of the Beast, that was rather common. So they came across this world. However, what they found interesting was that the feudal worlders on the planet were actually fighting back, and fighting back effectively. Even though they had simple steel and there was not much basic technology, they've gone back to a feudal society, sort of post-medieval technology-wise. The people on the world were still fighting and resisting and standing their ground against the orcs. This actually inspired Varakal, and once he'd routed the orcs off the world, he claimed right of conquest and claimed the world as the new homeworld of the Storm Knights chapter, believing that these feral worlders, these feudal worlders, they had honor, they had nobility, and they had strength that would be perfect for his new chapter. So he claimed the world as his own. They raised a mighty fortress monastery in the mountains on the central continent, and claimed that the world would be forever protected by the chapter. An interesting little tidbit, the Storm Knights didn't actually bother to remove the orcs off either of the two habitable moons on the planet, and in fact you left the orcs there as savage feral orcs to use as training worlds. So they send the scouts up there to fight the orcs and train against them, giving them direct combat exposure against greenskins, while also, and giving them direct combat experience. However, after about 5 centuries of this, someone in the Administratum and the Inquisition found out about it and declared that it was akin to harboring Xenos, and demanded that they all be destroyed and the Storm Knights go on a penitent crusade for 50 years. So what that turned into was the Night of the Long Fire, where the entire chapter mustered together and purged in a single night both the moons, so 500 marines on each, of every single greenskin, burning the forest and routing every single one of the greenskins off the moons. So that was just a fun little tidbit. As a side note, it did mean recruitment was now a longer process, as they recruited from the local petty kingdoms on the homeworld of Telenor, basically taking youths. They'd have sort of chapter serfs would infiltrate into tournaments and jousts and look for promising youths to take into the chapter. Most of the petty kingdoms considered it an honor. Oh yes, 2 people from my court were taken into the chapter. That proves that my kingdom is the better one, that sort of thing. So the Storm Knights now have a homeworld, and they've now set themselves up. Varakil was killed about 500 years after he took command of the chapter, so he was about 600 when he died. He was killed against greenskins. He took on a orc war boss and lost, unfortunately. But the chapter was now fully established. They had modelled themselves under the Codex Astartes, with one following the Dark Angel's pattern. So first company was Deathwing, second company was Ravenwing, although the Storm Knights never got very many bikes. So the Storm Knights themselves actually relied for Ravenwing on mechanized infantry. So every member or every squad in second company had a Rhino or a Razorback to compensate for their lack of bikes for their fast attack. I will get to chapter organization near the end. We'll just go through the history. Other notable events in the Storm Knights adventures or line of duty: fighting against Eldar and pirates, sort of crusading around. They took part in the Second and Third Wars of Armageddon. They sent 400 Marines to the Second War of Armageddon, and they sent 200 to the Third War of Armageddon, which was all they could muster at the time. During the Third War of Armageddon, they made friends with the Angels of Fire chapter. The Storm Knights first company captain, who was the highest ranking representative, agreed with the Angels of Fire assessment that Hades' hive should have been defended rather than abandoned, and that, combined with the two of them operating together to fight Greenskins, cemented their bond together with each other. So they're not like, bros, but, they're the type of person you'd talk to at a party and you'd know. Other notable friendships amongst the chapter: friends of the Angels in Carmine, the Angels of Fire. Now, the Iron Knights and the Revilers are the two closest friends of the Storm Knights, and they got that way because of a shared campaign they had together. So, during the purge of the 21st founding chapters, the Storm Knights were called upon to deal with a renegade chapter that had realized that they were about to be purged, so had declared themselves renegade and taken over a cardinal world for them to rule, and the High Lord sent the Storm Knights in to get rid of them. However, by this point, the renegade chapter had declared themselves for chaos, so the Storm Knights were now having to fight against traitor PDF, chaos warbands that had kind of shown a lot for the fun, and demons, so it was becoming a bit of a slog for one chapter to deal with on their own. So the High Lords sent the Revilers, Raven Guard's successor chapter, who specialised in heavy firepower, and the Iron Knights, third founding Imperial Fist successor chapter, specialising in siege warfare. And together, over the course of 6 months, the three chapters together annihilated all of the traitors in the Renegade 21st founding chapter, and put the entire Shrine World to an exterminatus at the end of it, despite the Adeptus Ministerum's rather strong insistence that they don't. With that, they all kind of forged their friendship together, and they've, sort of have ancient oaths and called upon each other in battle more than once. In terms of recent history for the chapter, well, when the Great Rift opened, the Storm Knights panicked as 6,000 World Eaters suddenly made their way towards their homeworld. 2 companies of Storm Knights were left on their detachment crusading against traitors upon a hive world, as they believed that if they allowed the hive world to fall, it would only serve as a resupply point for the traitors, moving into the system where they occupied. Unfortunately, despite a heroic last stand and valiant action, all but one of the Storm Knights upon the homeworld of Telenor were destroyed. The planet was sacked, the moons were razed, and the World Eaters pissed off. Now, interestingly, the World Eaters did not completely kill everyone on the planet, nor did they actually get around to fully looting the Storm Knights' fortress monastery. They were more interested in blood and skulls, so they didn't and they ransacked the place, but they didn't really go into the forests to look for every single last human, nor did they really bother, stealing everything that wasn't nailed down. So, when Hyperion and his company, when 6th and 8th Company arrived back on the homeworld, they found it devastated. They found it completely ransacked and ruined, with only one tactical marine left alive. Brother Helion of the 2nd Company was the only one left alive on Telenor, and he was entombed into an ironclad siege dreadnought chassis, and he remains the only survivor of the fall or the razing of Telenor, as it's now come to be called. As he said, the dreadnought himself wishes he died on the world and kind of regrets what happened, but it is what it is. So, with their homeworld razed, them being reduced down to 200 Marines, the Great Rift having opened, and shit going sideways pretty quick, and a World Eaters warband crusading around the sector, trashing everything it comes across, things were not looking too good for the Storm Knights. Captain Hyperion of the 8th Company became the new chapter master. The 6th Company captain actually refused the honour and gave it to Hyperion. So Hyperion took up the mantle, and his first thing he needed to do was he needed help. He was not, even though he was commander of the Assault Marines Company, he was not above having some brains. So he went out to seek out the Dark Angels, because he'd hoped that the Dark Angels would perhaps give them some weapons and equipment, but above all, would give them a reprieve from having to hunt the Fallen and do the Dark Angels' bidding for a while the chapter rebuilt. Meanwhile, the last company left secured what was left of the homeworld. The fortress monastery was completely trashed and destroyed. However, there were still relics here and there, bolters, weapons and equipment, still around. So they basically ransacked their own destroyed fortress for whatever they could survive. Unfortunately, they arrived about a month after the World Eaters left. As I said, the poor survivor actually put himself into sus-membrane sleep, which was how he, under a body of corpses, which is how he was able to survive. Some of the gene seed was still intact, so they were able to recover what they could. However, it was quite clear that the world itself was raised. They had a population of around 50 million, and they estimated from a quick census they did that there was less than 800,000 left in scattered tribes around the world. So the world was pretty devastated. Hyperion went to see the Dark Angels. He went to see the Dark Angels, and he'd hoped to, get weapons and equipment and a reprieve from hunting the Fallen. Instead, they came across Rabute Gilliman and the Indominatus Crusade. They had met up with the Dark Angels. Now, this gave the Storm Knights 600 Primaris Marines with the ability to manufacture more of them, plus brand new weapons and equipment and armor, plus Mechanicum salvage team and a Mechanicum surveyor team to assist in the rebuilding of the homeworld. Hyperion himself actually, he did not personally meet Gilliman, but he was in the same room as Gilliman, so he saw Gilliman at a distance, which was very inspiring for the brand new chapter master. And so he and the new Storm Knights returned back to their homeworld. Now, what they needed to do, once they got back, they needed to coordinate what they were going to do. They set out the Primaris Marines into new detachments alongside seasoned Marines, and they sent them out to combat any traitor insurrections or lone traitor warbands or groups or detachments, to give the new warriors experience while still able to maintaining some stability over their sector and sort of a little bit of revengeance, as small as it was, against the World Eaters. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Mechanicus surveyor team said that the homeworld could actually be rebuilt. As I said, it had been razed, but it had not been ruined, so it was able to be saved. So the Storm Knights needed to rebuild the chapter now. They had been given a reprieve thanks to the Primaris Marines, and now they needed to rebuild. So for that, Chapter Master Hyperion also needed revenge against the World Eaters. That was his personal preference, but he lobbied to have refugees from Worlds in the Great Rift to be sent to Telenor to resettle, basically offering up the homeworld as a place for refugees to land on. That was the idea of rebuilding the population of the homeworld again. In addition, Mechanicum survey tour teams and terraforming teams arrived to help rebuild the planet. Of course, it's not a high priority world, so it's quite a long delayed out process, but the world is slowly being rebuilt. Now, Hyperion, as I said, was rapidly producing as many equipment as he could. He got as many ships as he could together, and sort of began a hit and run campaign against the World Eaters host, which had split into multiple detachments and pissed off to other sectors. However, the main force, which had the World Eater warlord that killed the former chapter master, still around. So the Storm Knights engaged in a number of hit and run attacks against them. They didn't take part in the Indominatus Crusade, or they didn't take part in the War of the Beasts, or any of the great stuff that was happening round by the Rift and things like that. The Storm Knights had their own problems to deal with, and they were still killing traitors and orcs where they found them, so they weren't slacking off in their duty. They were just keeping to their own turf and doing their own duty, sort of thing. So that's what the Storm Knights were up to during that time. As part of trying to get vengeance on the World Eaters, Hyperion cashed in on every single one of the chapter's ancient friendships, debts, and oaths. The Iron Knights were unable to provide any physical reinforcements or troops to help out. However, that was not what Hyperion wanted them for. Hyperion asked the Iron Knights, as masters of siegecraft, to design a new fortress monastery for the Storm Knights on Telenor that would be impregnable to siege. They wanted a new fortress monastery that was defendable and impregnable. And as Sons of Dawn, the Iron Knights know how to do that shit very well. The rest of the chapters, then he managed to call upon debts to help them fight against the World Eaters. And thankfully, if you read one of my short stories on the subject, the Storm Knights were able to corner the Chaos Warlord and the piece of the World Eaters fleet around the place, and they were able to destroy it. So the homeworld was redeemed. Well, not redeemed, but avenged is the better word. So the destruction of the homeworld was avenged, although Hyperion himself says it will not be true vengeance until every single last World Eater that set forth on Telenor is destroyed. So basically he set himself against the 12th Legion. So that's an ongoing process. And that is where it comes to an M42. The chapter is about 800 strong now and rebuilding. Chapter Master Hyperion was felled by a Keeper of Secrets and nearly killed. However, he was saved by undergoing the Rubicon Primaris and becoming a Primaris Marine. Reluctantly, it was a little bit against his will. Hyperion believes that the Primaris are the key to the redemption of the chapter. If every single one of the old Marines dies, and none of the Primaris are told about the Fallen and told about the curse of the Dark Angels, it is believed by Hyperion that the Storm Knights will be forever free from the curse of the Dark Angels and will be able to stand strong as honourable warrior knights in service of the Emperor and the memory of the Primarch, and will be free from any dirty hands or dirty blood of their parent chapter. So that's kind of where Hyperion is right now. So that was a abridged, and yes, this was the abridged version, history of the chapter. Now let's go on to a quick force organization. So, pre-raising of Telenor, the Storm Knights were a standard 1011 strong Space Marine chapter. They broke the codex slightly because they had 11 additional Marines and on top of their 1000 Marines as the personal honor guard of the chapter master. These were warriors handpicked by the chapter master from around the chapter, and they were separated from the chapter's traditional ranks and acted as the personal bodyguard of the chapter master himself. This goes back to their founding, because there were only 11 Marines in addition to their founder that survived the Orc attack in the Hive World, that the traditions kind of kept on. So an 11-man strong bodyguard guarding the chapter master. Aside from that, whatever tactical things do they have? Pre-raising, they had 30 suits of Terminator armor. They had 7 dreadnoughts, including one very rare Contemptor pattern dreadnought that was recovered and salvaged a long time ago and used to inter the most mighty or noble deserving warrior. It was previously one of the High Reclusiarchs, or the Chief Interrogator Chaplains, that occupied it. However, it was destroyed during the raising of the homeworld, unfortunately. And there was an attempt to see if they could resalvage the Contemptor frame, but it's unlikely. That's an ongoing process. In terms of starships, they had a fleet of... They had 2 battle barges. The Serenity's Wrath, which was classified as a battle barge, but in reality it was a Great Crusade era Grand Cruiser that had been converted into a battle barge. That was a gift from the Dark Angels. And a standard battle barge pattern, Mark II, in addition to 5 strike cruisers, 2 Vanguard escorts, and about 8 destroyers and little escort vessels. Now, their tactics, or their command structure post Great Rift and Primaris is there are 200 original Marines left, and with the rest of the chapter being made up of Primaris. The chapter itself is more akin to a standard Codex Primaris chapter, as opposed to a Dark Angels Codex variation. The 11-man bodyguard is still the same, and it is actually made up of only First Founding Marines. The First Founding Warriors are basically the 200 that are left have been basically automatically assigned to 1st and 2nd Company. Originally, when the Primaris were being trained during the first few years, the Firstborn were spread out and acted as sergeants for their Primaris brethren to help them out. However, now, because Hyperion wants to remove any chance of the Primaris finding out about the Fallen, all of the Firstborn Marines have been assigned to 1st and 2nd Company in their own detachments. They've lost a battle barge, but the Serenity's Wrath still exists, so they have the Serenity's Wrath, 4 strike cruisers, 1 Vanguard cruiser, and 11 escort vessels, and they're petitioning the Mechanicum for more ships as they go. The homeworld is still being reconstructed. Terminator suits, they had 30, now they are down to 7. So there's only enough for 1 Codex approved squad. However, they're trying to rebuild and get more Terminator armor for the first of the Marines. However, the Firstborn have become secondary priority in terms of weapons and equipment as more and more of the chapter are Primarist. Their chapter's attitude towards the Primaris was mixed. Hyperion seeing it as an opportunity. The Chief Apothecary and the Master of the Forge agree with him and approve of the Primaris. The Interrogator Chaplains and the Librarius, what's left of them, disapprove of the Primaris and see them as a threat to their, to the Fallen and to the legacy of the original chapter. In terms of the Firstborn Marines, some are for them, some are against them, some are indifferent. However, it hasn't spurred over into bad blood or anything, and the fact that Hyperion himself was elevated to Primaris did actually go quite some way into mitigating any potential bad blood, seeing that, the Firstborn have one of their own in their minds as Chapter Master, and the Primaris see that someone who is now a Primaris and now understands them is in charge of the chapter. Hyperion himself, as I said, he kind of just wants to die, so he'll take his knowledge of the Fallen to the grave. But as a Primaris now, and as Chapter Master, he has duty to the chapter. As said, that Keeper of Secrets came very nearly close to killing him. So, yes, that is the history of the Storm Knights. The 4th founding sons of the Dark Angels, warrior knight sons of Telenor, the slayers of greenskins, and the enemies of the World Eaters. In the future, we'll see what comes of them. Oh, quite right. Very stupid. Their colour scheme. I forgot to mention it until now. Dumbass me. Their colour scheme, if you've seen my Chapter Master videos, you'll know. It is grey power armour with yellow shoulder pads. Now, after the raising of Telenor, in mourning for their homeworld and their lost brothers, Hyperion changed the yellow shoulder pads to black. So they have black shoulder pads now instead of yellow. However, it's rumoured that will soon change and it will go back to being yellow at some point. But for now it's black in mourning of their lost brothers. So, yes, that is my history of the Storm Knights. If you sat through this, then have a cookie. You're my favourite type of person to actually listen to my rambling crap. And I shall see you again another time.